Hello everyone, my name is Bernard Frank and I would like to introduce you to CreateHypervVMs, a set of PowerShell scripts that I use in my day-to-day work to automate the creation of Windows virtual machines on Hyper-V. Right? Still not sure if that's something for you? Yeah, let's see some use cases, right? So you shouldn't be afraid of PowerShell and you are using Hyper-V, right? So you may need at some point in time to create a lot of virtual machines. You may also want to do it in a repeatable way, right? For a lab environment, demo environments, or you have education environments that you need to um, repeatably recreate and want to do that in a fully automated way where you don't have to touch anything in order to get it up and running, right? Um, and also, you may want to bake your knowledge of installing stuff into scripts and not in screenshots posted in a Word document, right? Okay, if that sounds interesting for you, then stay tuned and let me introduce you to the tool, what it does. So it will create the virtual machines based on a golden image, right? So that means you have a sysprep virtual hard disk that that you have created and specify on the host and uh, uh, have copied it there. And then you will be modifying a configuration file, which is called one underscore vm.psd1, which is a PowerShell config file where you specify the virtual machines, how many you want to have, what the size is, so how many CPUs it needs, how much RAM it wants to have, the number of network adapters you want to attach to it, and maybe the number of disks this virtual machine should get. Right. The next thing, um, each virtual machine gets its own configuration, right? So the operating system inside of the virtual machine, the Windows operating system, wants to have a name. It wants maybe to have a specific IP address, static IP addresses, DNS settings, and whatnot. And this is specified in the second file, which is an unattend settings file, right? And then after the operating system is installed, um, you may want to further customize your virtual machine, right? So you may want to install stuff, update stuff, maybe also want to do an Arc integration with Azure, or, it's just basically kick off PowerShell scripts that further customize the virtual machine individually. And that can be specified in a third file, which is the post-install scripts file, right? Okay, sounds interesting still. Okay, stay tuned because now we are, going into the demo section and I will do the steps um, as proceeded. One final word. What are the requirements for this to work? Well, you need to have an operating system, right, a Windows Server operating system with Hyper-V installed and the corresponding PowerShell tools on it. You can launch the scripts either, through PowerShell remoting or launching locally, right? Yeah, so without further ado, let's switch into the demo section, right? And I log on to my system. So let me take you to the GitHub repository where you can find the solution. So under repositories, navigate to CreateHypervVMs, right? This is the repository we are using. And from there, you take, there's a bunch of PowerShell scripts there, even with a description of how you should use it. However, we'll perform these actions now on video. So what I'll do is I'll download the contents of this one as a zip file and copy it to my um, hypervisor, right? So let's grab this one and copy it to my host. And I will extract it as a create. Yeah, let's use the default name. And there you go. just clean up a little bit of stuff to have it a little bit not so in so much subfolders. Okay, so here are my scripts, right? And the first starting point is you use the CreateHypervVMs PowerShell script, which is sort of the master script, right? Let's edit this. And you can use, whatever code editor for PowerShell that you want to use. It could be either Visual Studio Code or, you use the integrated scripting environment, right? However, color coding would be nice to have. Okay, so first of all, watch the comments in that PowerShell script, and I think you're pretty good to go from there on, right? So the first thing that we need to provide is to provide a folder where you have a virtual hard disk prepared, right? Um, where can you get one? Well, on the Microsoft site, you have the possibility to download the demo versions of the Windows Server, for example, as a virtual hard disk, right? So, yeah, maybe we can do this. So navigate to the eval center from Microsoft. Downloads eval dot Windows, and there you go. The evaluation center. Download your copy of Windows Server as a virtual hard disk, and before you can do that, you probably need to type in some information about yourself. And here you go for the download. Download the virtual hard disk. And after a while, it's been downloaded and should be in your downloads folder. So I have downloaded the virtual hard disk to my local PC. Then I have copied it over to the Hyper-V system, right? And then we need to do some things, right? The first one is to go and change the path of this file to reflect the system or the file on the destination, right? So take a copy of the path and modify it so that it matches the local path perspective, right? So because we are executing this in the context of the Hyper-V system. Okay, so now this is our image. Next thing is this step where we need to think about, where to place the virtual machines. Do we want to have a local drive or should that be a clustered volume? In my case, it's a cluster shared volume sitting or provided by my failover cluster. So let's see if that path is available, right? Get rid of this one. Now let's navigate to the cluster storage. There we have a CSV number 1, which is perfectly fine, right? Because that's available. I don't have the CreateVMs subfolder, however, that will be created by the script. Okay, so far, so good. Next thing will be step number 2. We need to think about the generic, complex, local admin password, right? So this is the default. In case you don't specify anything else for the virtual machine, this one will be used for the local admin account, right? So make sure that this is secure enough for your system. Okay, are we done yet? No. There is another step that we need to take care of, which is, we need to navigate to the config files and adjust them to our needs. So I will do the bare minimum, right, in order to get this up and running. And we'll start with the first file, which is one_VMs. So let's navigate to that folder where I have downloaded this. And I will edit this one also using the integrated scripting environment, the PowerShell ISE, right? So this is a PowerShell config file which follows a specific format, right? So you should be able to see that format here. Basically, it's a key value pair of file thing, right? Um, you better don't change this value here because it's following a certain logic, right? So your first virtual machine is always VM0, next one will be VM1. If you have additional ones, it will be VM2, VM3, yada, 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 yeah, and so on, okay? So follow these steps, right? But don't use anything else than VM0. What you can change is this section here, right? So the individual settings for the virtual machines, right? And I'll go and talk a little bit about these settings here. This first one is the virtual machine name, how it will look up in Hyper-V, right? Um, then you have the possibility to overwrite the default path, right? So if you want your virtual machine not to be in the default path, which is specified here, right? If it should go anywhere else, right, then you can overwrite by specifying it here. If you leave that blank or empty, then it will use the default path, right? Next one will be the virtual machine's memory. Um, let's use gigabytes as the base for it, and I will adjust it to use 4. And then we'll need to talk about the virtual machine generation, right? Hyper-V allows you 2 virtual machine types, 1 and 2. VM generation 1 would mean a BIOS or legacy BIOS virtual machine. Generation 2 is an UEFI-based virtual machine. And this, I would go for generation 2 by default. However, the image that we have downloaded, the eval version of Windows Server, is a generation 1 virtual hard disk. So in order to get the system up and booting, I need to, provide the right motherboard for it, which is a BIOS-based one. Hence, I need generation 1 instead of a UEFI-based BIOS, UEFI-based system. However, I would need to do it for the other one as well, right? Because I'm using the same image for both of the virtual machines. So let's do that and maybe play a little bit with the processors so that I don't overload my system so much, right? So 4 virtual processors per VM, both are generation 1, and then my VM shutdown action should be my VM stop action should be shut down. That means if Hyper-V gets shut down, the virtual machine will be shut down as well. So the operating system will be gracefully shut down and not saved at some point in time. Okay, next thing would be the virtual machine network adapters. You can have multiple network adapters per machine, right? So in this case, 3 adapters are specified, even using different VLAN IDs. Let's assume I only need 2 of them. Then I, just remove one adapter and, save that file. There's one big or important portion of it, which is the name of the switch, right? This is my default name, which is in the file. However, that might not be the name that is available on the system, right? So the virtual machine switch might be named totally different. So how do I find out? Let's, remote into the Hyper-V system and do a get VM switch. Right, and there you could see my switch name is different. It is called Converged Switch Compute Management, and I need to replace, that with this name here. Right, need to do it for all and save that file. Next thing would be to, come up with how many disks I want to have for that virtual machine. In that case, the first VM gets two additional data disks, right? There will be the operating system disk and two additional data disks with 30 gigabytes maximum. And the other virtual machine, only has the operating system disk. Okay, that's good for now. I'm done with this file. Is that all? No. We need to then have a look at the unattend settings of that file, and I'm copying or I'm editing the local copy of that file. And here we go. And let's go through these values here. It's same config file format, same values, virtual machine 0, virtual machine 1, right? Don't change this. However, what you can change is inside the brackets here, right? So the virtual machine name I choose for consistency. I take the same name for the operating system as well, right? I mean, you could change it so that Hyper-V looks a little different than from the operating system inside. However, it might be a good practice in order to have the same name for the same virtual machine on two different sections. Here is the possibility to override the local admin's password, right? If you don't want to override it and use the default, which you specify here, right? Then you can, just remove that value, right? So let's copy that stuff out, and then you would, just use the default password. Then some other settings, for example, like the input locale, which is the keyboard layout, right? The time zone, and maybe the system locale for defining the sorting algorithms and whatnot can be specified here. Product key is can be used, but it needs to fit to your image, right? This in my option, it won't do any harm, right? But if you don't have a valid product key that matches your virtual hard disk, then it might turn out with a failure. However, if you download an eval version, you don't really need a product key. It will use, a time-bombed version of the operating system, so 180 days is okay. So I can remove that section here as well, right? As it is an eval version downloaded. Next thing is the IP address. So this is a static IP address that will be assigned to the first network adapter the virtual machine has, right? And the first network adapter the virtual machine has is defined by an alphabetical order, right? So this is, let me just, minimize that. So when going to the NICs, right, you have two network adapters. Alphabetical order is management is first, SMB is next, right? So management is the first one, the top one, and this one will be receiving the IP address settings from the unattend settings file, right? So this adapter will be receiving this IP address, right? However, if you don't specify an IP address, right, you can leave that section out. It will use DHCP for figuring out which IP address to choose, right? So virtual machine number 2, right, or VM1 is working with a DHCP server, right? Okay, so let's save this file as well. Last file is the post install scripts file, right? And this one specifies what happens with the virtual machine after the operating system is installed, right? In my case, just to demonstrate the logic here is, hey, step number 0 is called timestamp, right? And then for this step, execute this script, right? And this script doesn't require a restart. So we won't wait for, rebooting, stopping the virtual machine and then restarting it and then performing the next action. It will, just go to the next step if there is any, right? In my case, there is none because I have commented this section. However, if you want to have a second action, you would just comment that out, right? And then you have a second action, right? In my case, it's the same command done just a second time, right? Important to note that this file is also in the same folder as, as all the other stuff, right? So you could see it here. It's that PowerShell script. What does it do? Well, basically, if you're familiar with PowerShell, anything what can be done with PowerShell can be done here, right? So it's executed under the context of the local admin with the local admin privileges, right? And he is sort of doing a log file and outputting the current time into the post install scripts log, right? Which is inside of the virtual machine, right? So that is, I think, the interesting piece, right? Because that stuff here customizes or can customize each VM individually, right? So for the second VM, for example, I do the same step. However, another action that I do is a Windows Update section, right? So it's launching a completely different script, and it's also, requiring a reboot for that. So after the updates have been done, it will reboot the virtual machine, and then if there would be any subsequent steps, it would perform those. However, this is the last one in the line, so it will stop after this one, right? So I think the logic is relatively simple. You may need to do some practice with the configuration files, but I think it's once you edit it a little bit, you get used to it. And let's save that file and now kick it off. Okay, so I am connected to my Hyper-V host, right? So let's navigate to the folder where I have um, the stuff copied. Let's do it there, right? So here are the files that I have just modified if you look at the timestamp. And now I launch, the CreateHypervVMs script, which is sort of, the single code line that, is required, or the single command or executable that's required, right? So this is how it should look like, right? It starts to create the virtual machines one by one. It will tell you which virtual machine it's about to create, right? So first of all, it will create a virtual machine in the specific folder. It will then create the network adapters and copy the image to that directory, right? It will then mount that virtual hard disk, create an unattend file for that virtual machine, and then booting it up and let it customize, right? So that's probably relative fast, depending on on how long it takes for your system to copy 9 gigabytes, right? And if I look at this virtual machine here, let's connect to it. We see that that this system is still in the setup phase. Let's see how the hardware properties look like. Yeah, from the settings we could tell it got the 4 gigabyte, it got the 4 processors. We have the operating system disk and data disk number 1, data disk number 2, and we have network adapter 1 and network adapter 2, right? So that's how it should look like. Okay, and let's see if the virtual machine gets the right IP address that we have specified in the unattend file. So watch this section here, right? Because it should get the IP address on the management adapter as it is the first one in alphabetical order. And here you go, right? So it is taking this one, assigning it to the management adapter, and the other SMB adapter has nothing configured, so hence it will use DHCP or whatever it gets from DHCP or through a custom script action, right? Yep. So let's see what happens there, right? So virtual machine number test1 is up and responsive, right? We are remoting into it and performing our first action, which is, sort of doing the timestamp, in the log file, right? After it is, after it is finished, it will, sort of log off the system so that nobody can tamper with the system. So let me jump into the system and use the password for logging in to see what happens. Use the typewriter, select the password, and sign in. And here you go with your Windows Server operating system downloaded from Microsoft, and under the temp folder you could see the post-install scripts, with the action I was run at 2 times because we had the script action set up to do two entries, right? So that's how this logic works. Okay. So for the other system, right, you could see it is behaving differently, right? So first the timestamp action was done, but then the next step was done with the Windows Update. Um, it is always a little bit tricky to follow Windows updates. However, you could probably tell from the bandwidth or from the download it takes and from the CPU usage of that virtual machine that something is happening while we are watching it. So uh, let's watch a little bit on the output. What happens? You could see, that we have seen some updates for that operating system. It will now download these updates and then install those. And that's, I think, a little bit boring to watch. Hence, therefore, I will cut the video and forward this to this. Okay, so you have seen how to use CreateHypervVMs. That's what we did. And yeah, hopefully you will find that useful. Let me know if you find bugs within that code. Open up a GitHub issue, um, yeah, in the repro and let me know how that works. Okay, thank you guys. Take care. Bye-bye.